Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers. I thank everybody that's involved with this process because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers.
Experience is not about the publisher, it is about us, the authors.
There you go.
Oh my gosh, they aren't going to be watching me. They're going to be looking for little Letty.
Okay. Get the book.
Hi there. I'm Carl Johnoff, and my pen name is Kurt Niemann. And my book, the one that I've been talking about for the last week and a half, and we've got, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, more to go this week, is Badge 411. I'll get it there somehow or another. Give it to my wife. She knows how to do that stuff.
Not really. There we go. All right.
And this is a book that it contains about 82 of my experiences as a probation officer. I worked for the most part juvenile, and I was a probation officer for 32 years. So those 80 stories is barely a drop in the bucket. But there they are. And I hope you get the book and I hope you enjoy them. And I hope that you get a little more insight in terms of how law enforcement officers work, how the criminal justice system and the juvenile justice system works. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some side issues that directly affect everything that I've been able to do and haven't been able to do. And I'm going to glance every once in a while at a sheet of paper I have here because it's got some numbers, and I'm not all that great at memorizing numbers, but I want to convince you that just your wishes or what ought to happen or whatever doesn't have the entire impact on what happens in the system, in any government system, in any corporation for that matter, and that is what's going on in the budget. Now, the today's discussion is entitled Violent Property and Personal Crimes versus Drug Crimes, and how does that work, assuming it does work? And what I want to do is I want to start off by going back in history just a little bit, the early 20th century. Cassandra says...
Cassandra. Hi, Shirley. Hi, Carl. Great discussion so far. Glad I was here since day one.
Hey, I'm glad you were too. And I
like your input.
Yeah, we really do. What I'm going to talk about is budgeting. How do we come about budgets? How do the rules of the game go? with the budgets. I was talking yesterday about placing juvenile offenders and status offenders, the incorrigible, unmanageable kids, in residential treatment centers and foster homes, getting child protective services involved, getting guardians ad litem. That's an attorney that I haven't talked a lot about. So I'll tell you what it is right now. There are two primary kinds of attorneys that operate in the juvenile justice system. One of them is a prosecutor. The other is a defender. As often or not, the defender is a publicly funded attorney, because most of the time juveniles and their families can't afford attorneys when a kid is accused of a property crime or a violent crime or a drug crime. What are the community resources, and how do they work, and what operates them? From a purely social point of view, say a status offender, an incorrigible or unmanageable child, but not one committing violating criminal laws, there's child protective services, there's foster homes, residential placements. Perhaps the schools can be more involved. There are counselors, therapists, psychiatrists, hospitalization. All of that costs money. From a delinquency or criminal point of view, there's the courts, and the courts will involve the public defenders. So those are the ones that are paid for by the state, and the prosecutors, and on and on and on it goes. And it costs. And it costs a lot, folks. I've said several times in the past that it was my experience a lot of years that the budget that we had in the juvenile court here in this state was running out of money after the first 6 months of a fiscal year, because the demands were so great. What creates these demands? Well, let me get into a little bit of my own personal biases, and that's some of the stuff I want to bring up today. One of them, let me take you back in history a little bit. Prohibition. Back in 1920, a lot of financial and political influences convinced the federal government that there needs to be an amendment to the Constitution that prohibits drinking. By God, we can't have these people popping the cork and opening the beer bottle and doing all these things. And why? The stated reasons generally had to do with domestic violence and abandoned children. That's the way it's quoted, at least for back in 1920. Well, the 18th Amendment was passed, and booze of any and every kind in this country became illegal. So that took all the booze away from everybody in this country. It didn't. Nobody got drunk. There was no underground. There was corruption. There was gangs. Al Capone, ring a bell, and on and on and on. It just seemed to be endless, and it's based on budgets that were created through attempting to legislate morality. Yeah, in a lot of ways, laws do reflect the morals and the values of this culture. But attempting to legislate individual morality, like whether or not you can have a margarita, just did not work. And in 1933, President Roosevelt said, well, I'm going to get rid of this. So the amendment that created the Debbie News, do you think the government has been stingy when it comes to budgeting? What does this impact? Oh, whether the government is stingy depends on your own bias and in what kind of a chair you're sitting. Do I think we need to spend more money in criminal justice, especially juvenile justice? Absolutely. Juvenile justice is where we need to go when we have people who are misguided, whose thought processes and decision-making processes do not agree with the community expectations. Juvenile is where we need to go because we are far more likely to affect the youngster than we are the, I don't know, 45-year-old multiple killer. Yes, much is written on our plate in terms of the way our personality is going to be up to from birth to age 5 or 6. But number one, it doesn't mean everything cannot change, and it doesn't mean it can't be at least modified. And it's more likely to be modified with juvenile budgets than adult criminal budgets. But let's stay with this tale that I'm telling now for just a little bit. We, of course, learned a lot by passing the 18th and later on the 21st Amendments that prohibited and then withdrew the 18th Amendment. We learned a lot about trying to prohibit the kinds of personal self-destructive things that people do, right? Well, in the 1970s, we created the war on drugs. And the war on drugs, let me get into a couple of numbers here. Since 1971 up to 2021, we've spent over $1 trillion on the war on drugs. $39 billion just in 2022 alone. Prisons and jails in the United States, which are way overcrowded. Since the 1970s, we have increased by 500% our offender population in jails and populations. And according to the stats, and let me quote prisonpolicy.org for the people that are just going to find out, hey, wait a minute, where is he getting all these numbers? Prisonpolicy.org. 51% of the offenders in jails and prisons are white. 38% are black. And there's a lot of social and behavioral reasons for all that. And not all of it is simply racial bias, although some of it will be. Okay, the rest of the population is Native American and Asian and on and on and on and on. But 1 out of every 5 inmate in American jails and prisons is there simply on a drug conviction. That's it. Who are the victims? Well, there's all kinds of victims. There's family, there's friends, but then everything that we do affects everybody that's around us. Chad Warren says, regardless how long it's been since the law has been established, it still needs to be modified, especially given people and their patterns also change. And boy, you are right about that. My own personal bias, although I promise I did everything I could in every instance and everything that you read about what I did in my book. I did everything I could to keep my personal biases at least at a minimum, if not completely gone. Okay. However, I will admit I would not shed a tear if the war on drugs pretty much went the same route as prohibition in the early 20th century. How do you forbid and legislate the drugs? I was reading on Facebook yesterday some 22 tons of cocaine worth billions of dollars were seized just last week by officials in Ecuador, and they're doing big money seizures like that all the time. If that's the kind of stuff that's being produced and sent up here, Well, guess what? There must be somebody that wants the product. You can't sell anything if somebody doesn't want to buy it. And there's going to be people that want to buy drugs. Are they wrong? Yeah. Are they self-destructive? Yeah. Are we going to change it?
Here's a new question.
Well, we haven't been doing much of a job of changing it over the last 50 years. I'll tell you that. JP says, with the huge budget needed in jails, what are viable alternatives to juvenile detention, and how do they contribute to rehabilitation and community reintegration? Well, one of the at the lowest possible level in terms of having a big financial impact on the child and the child's family and on the community, the probation officer needs to be, and I promise you, at least at juvenile, we are dedicated toward behavior change. And what's it going to take? A lot of times you can get changes made simply through the school systems and also through parents being willing. I'll tell you, as a probation officer right now, if you're going to go to a juvenile offender's home and say, when are you parents going to straighten up your act? You're probably not going to get a ton of cooperation from the parent or the kid. Be aware that these people are already suffering an impact from their kid being arrested for anything from auto theft to homicide. And 9 times out of 10, it was my experience, 9 times out of 10, if you're going to get into change, you enlist the parents as soon as you possibly can. And 9 times out of 10, if nothing else, they won't stand in your way. If they cooperate and they actively participate, that's even better. But that is where you really want to go. And if you can't do it in the home, because there are problems in the family, perhaps, or worse than that, there are problems in the community, and I'm including gangs. And I said several times before, I did 12 years with inner city gangs in my area. That has a heck of an impact on the offender's behavior. So that you may need to get into a residential treatment center. And I have to tell you, although there are some bad guys in that field, for the most part, boy, residential treatment centers really do a lot of really good work. What are you going to do when the program is over? Are you going to send the kid back to the original community, which helped him do the things that he did that got him into court in the first place? Are you going to send him somewhere? Is he going to go with a relative? Is he going to go? I had a case, and you'll read about it in the book, where had an individual was really heavily into burglaries and whatnot, and the future didn't look all that great for him, and his attitude really was bad. And one day his mom said, you know what? I've got a relative up in Alaska, and it's on an island in Alaska. You could see, and he's into something about houses. What could go wrong? What's he going to do on an island in Alaska? And I said, yeah, actually, that does kind of sound a little bit good. And the public defender picked it up and just really pounded the desk to get it done right away, and on and on and on. And the kid went up there to Alaska. And then I got a subpoena from the Alaskan court. What did the relative do with houses? He did burglaries. You never know. Oh, back to it. Talk about population. See, everything that we do, certainly in the government, is going to cost you money. If the population increases, does that mean that the budgets will need to be increased? I promise you it will. So we can say, well, only, what do you want? 10% of the country's population will ever do anything that's a violation of the law. Well, in 1950, this country's population was 2.5 billion people. But in 2020, it was 7.7 billion people. Just from the time that I went into the Marine Corps, saved the world from communism, and then got out and got into probation. Just in that period of time, the population of this country and of the world has more than tripled, which means that if you just go by statistics, you're going to have an increase in criminal behavior. That would increase. That would include in juvenile behavior, which means more money. Judith says, if you can change one thing about our jail system, which you think you can have which can have a consequential effect, what would it be? Oh, and again, two major things, whether it's jail or prison, okay? Budget and training. And I think probably in government and probably in the private sector, corporation system, budget is a major thing, and training is the step kid of any organization. We don't need to have people just spend months and months and months and months in academies. We need to have them right now in the cell blocks working on people. Well, how are they going to work? I promise you, there's not hardly a person that gets into the criminal justice system that really knows and understands the criminal justice system without first getting an education, either at a college or university.
Reading your book.
Reading my book, which is one of the reasons why I'd like to see my book go to more colleges and universities that teach criminal justice. They're going to learn mainly through experience. I did back when I was a rookie. In those days, getting appointed as a probation officer, and understand that takes at least a bachelor's degree in a related field. Okay. Know somebody who knows the judge will appoint you. Now, it wasn't very long before that changed. In the late 1960s, that changed, at least in Arizona, to where you need to have schooling, you need to have pass various tests and interviews, and then an academy. But when I became a rookie, I finally needed to pass a written test, but that was it. But by that time, I already had the college education as well. They need more than that. They need experience. When I had the Juvenile Detention Officers Academy, and I got a lot of stories in my book about that, I loved that job. One of the first things that we would do with those new people was one of my partners had been a corrections officer at Florence State Prison here in Arizona. And we would take them on a tour, and that tour would go for 7 hours. And they would meet everything from common thieves to psychiatric problems to you name it. And did they get some eyes open? And then at that point, when that we left the prison 7 hours later, and we told them, well, if you got Valium, go ahead and try it, or whatever it takes to calm you down after your experience today. They would get big time into, well, hey, you got to tell us how this thing really works. Okay, Eleanor says there can still be a thin line separating different criminal charges. If things were up to you, how would you classify which crimes should serve life? Well, the first thing I think I would think about in that case, Eleanor, would be crimes against persons. Okay, and to get into the worst end of it, rape and homicide. Would I recommend life if a person were convicted of that kind of crime? Quite possibly so. Here's the real issue when you're going to think about actual prison time. is the person a danger to the community, and in what ways and to what degree, and what do you think it's going to take to cause that to change? Now, in some cases, you care less about what's going to take to have the person change their behavior than you do about the safety of the community. You have got to protect the safety of the community, whether you're a line police patrol officer or a probation officer or a parole officer. And again, a parole officer is a person who supervises people, offenders like I did, except that these offenders had actually done state prison time, and they were out early before their complete shot was done. Oh, gee, we could talk for hours about that. I think the major issue is danger to the community. And that isn't just personal. It can also include, of course, property as well. But for me, the main thing is personal injuries. Boy, how did I get off on that? Well, because I get these excellent questions.
That's right.
What
Important questions.
What is, when you're dealing with people and you're dealing with change, what is fair? I used to ask that in one of my first, when I was teaching criminal law and the criminal justice process in the academy. I used to say, what is fair? Kind of thing. And so ask everybody, what their opinion is of fair. And I would end up by saying, you see this? Everybody here in this classroom has a little bit different opinion as to what's fair. And number one, what's fair in a criminal case is going to at least partially depend on what your personal thoughts are about that criminal offense and whether or not you're a victim. So that fair, if you're going to act about fair, you got to think of fair as being a 4-letter F word. Forget it, people. Justice. What is justice? Boy, that's very similar to fair, isn't it? What is justice? Well, were you a victim? If you were, your definition of justice is going to be a lot different than mine. Although, yeah, I've been a victim too. But somehow I managed to survive it. What is affordable? And that goes back to where I started this whole thing today. What can you do if you want to place a juvenile, a troubled child, in a residential treatment center, and you're out of money and you're out of spaces? Because residential treatment centers don't just open up millions of places for millions of kids just for you to go ahead and fill them up right away. They're limited in their resources as well. So that what if a kid desperately needs residential treatment center and there are none available?
Sadly, we're down to 1 minute.
Generally, the response is going to be commitment to a state Department of Corrections, and that's going to be a juvenile prison. And again, how well the kid fares in that system is going to be directly related to how well the staff are trained and what the staff programs and policies are. Visit them.
Okay, you have numerous stories. Well, that's Cassandra again.
Cassandra says, I have numerous wonderful stories. The years I spent in my practice must have been a roller coaster ride. It was a wonderful roller coaster ride. As an aside, I'm also a licensed commercial pilot, and I was a flight instructor for a lot of years, and I taught aerobatics. And that's of course roller coaster rides, and I loved doing it, and I loved working with these kids even more.
And we're out of time. It's 2:30.
Oh my
so we're gonna
gosh!
have to say goodbye till
Okay.
tomorrow.
Yeah, I'll be back. I promise.